It is once again time for an edition of the Locked On Power Rankings, and boy, oh boy, there are a lot of teams on the bubble.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. I am Nick Zararis, joined by my co-host Hunter Hodes. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about some of the movement, not a ton of movement in the host voting polls, and then we're going to bounce around. There's a lot of teams on the bubble in both the Eastern and Western Conference, so each segment is going to be dedicated to one of the conferences because there's a lot of teams to talk about, and we don't want to do what we usually do, where we get sidetracked and go on a tangent and miss out on points we want to hit on because, frankly, there's a lot to talk about. So, Hunter, since last week, the Penguins slid down a couple spots. Dallas and Colorado volleyed back and forth. So let's start with Dallas because that's a quick and an easier conversation, and then we can dedicate a good chunk of this first segment to diagnosing the Penguins, something I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about. So Dallas and Colorado are going to keep volleying back and forth. Whoever has the better week is going to end up in first place in that division in the voting. Dallas is, I want to say, 5-1-1 in their last 7. So it's a lot easier for 6-1-0, in their last 7 games. When you keep winning, you're going to get a leapfrog. Colorado, not as deep as they are in years past. I know a lot of people aren't sold on Georgiev as a goalie that could win a Stanley Cup. There are a lot of factors to go back and forth. I came into the season thinking Dallas is better. I still think Dallas is better. Where are you at on that division?
It's close. The winner of this division is going to avoid playing Winnipeg in the first round, which, in my opinion, that's pretty big because the Jets are a really good team this year. They have Connor Hellebuck in net. Avoiding that especially is going to be big for whichever team wins the division just because you won't have to play Winnipeg potentially until the second round. And then if you're able to win that series, then you might be able to go on to the final depending on who comes out of the Pacific. When it comes to who's better, I still will die on the hill that when healthy, Colorado is a better team than Dallas, but it's by a smidge.
Okay.
With the level that Nathan MacKinnon is playing at this season, how he should be one of the favorites to win the Hart Trophy, I am going to take him and his line along with the Cale Makar pairing over Dallas, but it's by a hair because I know how good Heiskanen is. I know how good Robertson is, hence all those guys in Dallas. But when McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, Taves, and especially when Landeskog is in the lineup, I know he's not playing right now, but when the other guys are in the lineup and when they're playing at this level, there's just really not many teams that can stack up to what this team does on a nightly basis. If these two teams were to play in the second round of the playoffs, I would have Colorado as a very, and I mean a very slight favorite. I would take them to win in 7. I would not be surprised if Dallas won that series, but I just like how Colorado is playing. I mean, I know Dallas had the better week, and as you said, whoever has the better week is going to be at the top of this division. But when it comes down to it in a 7-game series, I like Colorado's high-end talent just a little bit more than Dallas's. And again, it's literally by a smidge.
That's ultimately what it comes down to. Do you prefer having a deeper lineup or do you prefer the top-end talent? And that's ultimately what the deciding factor between those two teams and your preference are. I think Dallas has the deepest forward group in the entire league. I think when you go defenseman for defenseman, Colorado's top 2 are definitely better, Makar and Taves. I think there's an argument that some people would take Taves over Heiskanen, even if I wouldn't. But then you start going down a little bit deeper. The emergence of Thomas Harley has been a big thing for Dallas this year, where they pushed Ryan Suter a little bit deeper in the lineup, which has given their defense a little bit more room as opposed to years past. They're a team, I think, that really should consider looking at Chris Tanev if they're serious about bolstering their playoff chances, adding one more right-handed guy to that group, especially because a lot of their good defensemen are left-handed to give themselves a little more balance. And you're going to need defensemen. I was talking about this on Locked On Flames with Jess yesterday. If you're a team that's going to the postseason and wants to go all the way, you're probably going to play at least 8 defensemen on the course of winning a Stanley Cup because guys are going to get dinged up. Playing playoff hockey for 2 months is taxing and tolling. Now, Hunter, I'm going to ask you very bluntly, why can't the Penguins put the puck in the net?
Well, Nick, would you like to know that they are the worst finishing team in the league this year? And
that I knew.
Yeah. And this has been a thing for 2 years now. They have been one of, if not the worst finishing team in the league, despite having really good underlying numbers. Expected goals, they're always top 5, top 10. Shot attempts per 60 minutes, they're top 5, top 10. High danger chances, it's the same. But they don't have enough finishing talent. It's been that same problem the last 2 years. Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, and I'll even throw Evgeny Malkin in there. I know he's been a bit more inconsistent this year, but he has 41 points in 50 games. He's just not having enough good line mates next to him. So I'll throw him in there a little bit, even though I think the bulk of the Penguins' handiwork this year has been Crosby and Gensel. These guys can't do it on an every night basis. Erik Karlsson, I think, has been advertised, but the reason why he's not even close to 100 points this year is just because, again, the Penguins really don't have enough finishing talent. You look at their bottom 6 goals for per 60. I'm going to shout out someone from Penguins Twitter for this, 404 response code on Twitter. The Penguins' bottom 6 goals for per 60 this year is 1.84. It was 1.85 last year. Their bottom 6 last year, which was also absolutely garbage, was a smidge better than this year's unit. Kyle Dubas failed at putting together a bottom 6 that could help support these core players, and it's killing them on a nightly basis. Yeah, I can talk about how Lars Eller has made me eat crow, but if that's your best bottom 6 addition to a team that's trying to contend, I don't think you're doing enough. So yeah, Nick, this team just can't finish. The power play stinks. I mean, it's one of the worst units in the league. And
they're
also, they don't have
31st in shooting percentage on the power play. They're shooting 8% on the power play. And for context, league average on the power play is usually about 15, 16%. So, but I have a question for you in regards to that. Because they are a talented team, where is the shooting finishing issue coming from? Because when I think about Pittsburgh, is it that Brian Rust isn't as good as he's been the last couple of years? Is it that Jake Gensel isn't finishing? Like, who in years past that was finishing these chances for them is it now that's really made it this glaring of an issue?
Well, it's definitely not Jake Gensel, Nick. 22 goals, 52 points in 50 games. He's a point per game player. He's been one of their 2 best players this year by far. It's not Sidney Crosby, who already has 28 goals and 52 points in 50 games as well this year. He's been amazing. Brian Rust, while I don't think he's as good as he used to be, he still has 14 goals and 30 points in 37 games. He is 4th on the team in terms of goals behind Gensel, Crosby, and Malkin. So I at least will take that production, even though he hasn't been as good. It's players outside of that, Nick. Riley Smith, great trade I felt like at the time. You didn't give up anything to get him. I even said, this is going to be the perfect Jason Zucker replacement, especially after how we did in Vegas last year. But so far this season, you look at what he's done. He has 9 goals in 44 games and is a ghost on a nightly basis. I think the Penguins could look to move him potentially at the deadline or over the offseason if they don't have a market for him at the deadline. The same thing for Rickard Rakell. He has 5 goals this year. This guy was almost a 30-goal scorer last year. That has completely gone away as well. You look at the bottom 6, they haven't been able to score. They wanted to put together a defense-first bottom 6, which, okay, I understand that process, but I just disagree with it because you need to have more scoring in those units. But when it comes to their lack of finishing, it's really just a multitude of factors. I think part of it is the system, even though they have top 5, top 10 underlying numbers. Second, I think it's the roster construction because you don't have enough pure finishers on this team. And third, I think it's also a little bit of bad luck, especially when a player like Rickard Rakell only has 5 goals this year after having 28 last year. Riley Smith was also a very good player last year. He doesn't even have 10 goals this year. So I think it's those 3 factors that have really contributed to this team being one of the worst finishing teams in the league these last several years, especially this year where they're dead last in finishing at 5-on-5.
So that'll wrap it up here for the first segment. Not a lot of movement. The NHL has been relatively static because we've got a pretty good grasp who's in the mix. The thing is, there are a lot of teams in the mix, which is what we are going to talk about coming up next. Our sponsor today is Camino Consulting. You know how difficult it is to get to know people that you work with, that people you come across might be a little bit difficult to get through. It is a lot easier when you have a friend in the fight. How would you like to get to know someone better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big issues. After providing more than 20 years of service to small and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over well as you'd hoped? Get the Couples and Family Online Seminar for 25% off for the month of February using the discount code Locked On. Again, that is discount code Locked On for 25% off the rest of the month at CaminoConsulting.ca, or mention Locked On when reaching out for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Want to thank everybody hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday afternoon discussing the latest in the NHL. And we sit here at a point now where we're about 3 weeks away from the trade deadline. The teams that are on the bubble, one way or the other, are going to have to start making decisions as far as pushing some chips in or pulling chips out. Let's start in the East, where you and I, we're definitely a little bit more familiar. We come across these teams a lot more in our day-to-day. We've got Detroit, Tampa Bay, Philly, New Jersey, the Islanders. Those are the teams I would consider on the bubble. If you wanted to say Pittsburgh's in there too, just based on the talent, sure. But based on the standings, those are your bubble.
Just put Washington in there too, just in case.
Just in case, sure. But nobody thinks Washington's going on a run. No. Pittsburgh, maybe. And I think we start with Tampa Bay because I think Tampa Bay is the easiest to diagnose. They just lost their number 2 defenseman last week to a broken leg. He broke both bones in his leg. He's not coming back this season. They're effectively down to one good NHL defenseman. Andrei Vasilevsky is playing about league average in net. God bless Kucherov, but he's one guy. He can't do it all by himself. I mean, Point and Stamkos still have decent counting stats, but that's a really, really top-heavy team that just doesn't have a huge margin for error. And I feel like they're definitely a team that them and the Flyers in particular are really in positions where I could see them kind of falling back just through no real fault of their own, but other teams are going to eventually go on little runs here.
I think with Tampa Bay, I mean, they're going to buy this year. I mean, they really have no choice at this juncture, especially with the season that Nikita Kucherov is having. Steven Stamkos has been great, and we all know Andrei Vasilevsky can turn it on anytime in the playoffs. I know he's been around league average this year, as you said. When it comes to their defensemen, though, you said it, they really only have Victor Hedman at this point, and that's why I could really see them going after Chris Tanev in a big way here. I think they will have the package to make it happen when it comes to Calgary. Another defenseman who I also think they could go after, Nick, what about Jacob Chikrin out of Ottawa? I could actually see them considering getting him. I know his contract situation and all that, and he hasn't been what Ottawa, I think, hoped he was going to be when they got him last year. And also, they're not going to make the playoffs this year. But I could see Tampa Bay being really interested in getting him just because he fits what they want to do for this year and in the coming years. He's good offensively. He's good in his own zone. They would have the package to get him. And we all know how Tampa Bay likes to get around salary cap trouble. They'll have no problem with that, I think, in this case too. So I could see Tampa Bay going after one, if not both those guys. But they'll probably only get one of them, but I could still see them going after both of them overall.
Do you buy Detroit? Do you think this is actually a good team, or do you think this is just like they're the best of the mediocre teams? Because I think that's where they are.
I think they're the best of the mediocre to wild card teams this year. I think Detroit, they have a lot of really fun and interesting pieces, but do I expect the Red Wings to go into the playoffs and score a massive upset, Nick, over Boston or the Rangers, for example, whoever wins the Metro? No, I don't. I don't think that in the slightest. I think they can give these teams fights in a first round series. I think these series could eventually go 6 games or maybe even 7, but I don't see the Red Wings winning a series this year yet. I know Red Wings fans that maybe listen to this are probably going to come, old takes expose me if they do go and win a series, but I think right now their time is not here just yet. They're getting there, though. This is the big step for them to make the playoffs. But even if they lose in the playoffs this year, they're still going to try to take that next step next year to win a round or two, to make it a deep run for the first time in quite a while. they're on pace in this big process because they've had a long rebuild, right? They are, I think, where they should be right now. But I don't see them as a bona fide contender this year. I think if they want to make a small depth move at the deadline, that's fine. But I don't see them going out there and, beating one of these top teams in the East. Even though, again, I think this conference is not that good. I just think the Red Wings are just kind of the best of a pretty mid wild card race this year, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the joke you and I always make is there a lot of parity in the NHL, or is every team just bad? And that there's a real argument that this year in particular, it's just that every team is pretty mediocre and they all beat each other, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement of the idea of parity. It's more that there just aren't a lot of good teams, so the average teams all take turns beating each other. Let's go to the tri-state area and Devils Islanders. I'm still waiting for the Patrick Waugh bump to happen. I know Islander fans are happier about the leader they have. They feel that at the very least, even if the team isn't playing that much better, that players are being held accountable. Waugh is kind of juggling lines, moving things around to try and find that next gear for this group. I know there was some talk about maybe trying Kyle Palmieri with Horvat and Barzal as kind of to try and get them going, to give them the finishing talent they need. And then the Devils, man, the Devils are injured beyond belief. I mean, Vanacek is out. From what I understand, Vanacek got hurt the other day. He's probably not going to play in the Stadium Series game on Saturday. And Akira Schmidt was a nice story in the playoffs last year. He upset the Rangers, but he's, 22. He very clearly is still a little undercooked. At what point did the Devils have to say, we're either going to push some chips in or it's about next season? Because that's what it feels like at this point in regards to the Devils and the Islanders. I've seen a decent amount of conjecture amongst Islander fans about, hey, maybe we should consider trading Palmieri. Maybe we should see if we can get a haul for Brock Nelson, that type of thing. Because if it's not going to happen this year, you got to be honest.
I mean, I agree with you, especially about the Islanders. I don't think the Islanders are any good. I'm sorry. I know Islanders fans may come at me for that, but this is a team that has 13 overtime losses. They're getting close to setting the NHL record for the most overtime losses in a season. You take that out, Nick, this team is 22-31 this year. And yet, you look at the standings, they're 3 points out of a playoff spot. That's the point system is sometimes so funny. But I will say, Matt Barzal has played really well under Patrick Waugh. He's really starting to unlock him even more and showing why he's one of the best players in the league. But what has this team shown to really want to buy this year? And I'm talking to Lou Lamoriello with this, because I was going to say what you said. They haven't gotten that new coach bump from Patrick Waugh yet. They're kind of still middling the way they were under Lane Lambert before he got fired. What is it going to take for this team to get that bump? Because they're not as good defensively as they were under Barry Trotz. Ilya Sorokin, who I think is one of the 3 best goalies in the league, he's not playing like it for much of this season. And outside of Barzal, a lot of their top players just haven't been as good as they normally are. Well, I would say Noah Dobson has been really good this year, but him and Barzal can't do it on an every night basis. I think Brock Nelson, I've seen quite a few times, has been a ghost for the Islanders this year. So
Brock's still going to finish with 35 goals, though. Brock's going to be a 35-goal guy.
Yeah,
the issue, in my opinion, the Islanders' big issue is that Adam Pelech got concussed like 2 times in a season and a half, and
Pulak's been hurt too.
They went from having one of the deeper defensive groups in the room and playing really good defensive hockey to now where Pelech is extremely inconsistent. Pulak is not the player I thought he was. And as you said, Dobson's their best defenseman, but Romanov doesn't really do a whole lot for me. He's fine. He's not particularly good. And then those last 2 spots, whether it's the other Sebastian Aho, Samuel Bolduc, they had Mike Riley played for them quite a bit this season. We're like, those guys are fine, but the Islanders needing every game to be a slog to try and drag to overtime, it's really difficult to win that way. And this is the last point I'll make before we take our second break. The idea here is you want to be a good team that can win multiple styles of game, where if it's a track meet, you can adapt to that. If it's a rock fight, you can adapt to that. If your goalie needs to stand on his head, you can do that. The Islanders can only win the rock fight. That's the issue the Islanders have, and we will be right back. I love going to sporting events. I went to the Ranger Flames game on Monday. I went to Devils Flames last week. I went to Rangers Avalanche last week. It is really hard to get tickets. It is time consuming. It is frustrating. It is expensive. You shouldn't have to worry about where you buy tickets to your next event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My personal favorite thing, two things. Number one, the digital rendering of what the view looks like from your seat. I need to know what I'm looking at, especially when I'm going to MSG, where there are certain rows with the obstructed view where you can't see the scoreboard or you can't see below the goal line. So it is really important that I have that access. And the all-in pricing shows your entire total up front. There's no bait and switch at the end once you click through to the final screen where there's an additional $40 to $50 that wasn't there when you put the tickets in your cart. So what makes Gametime the best? You need to get in on Gametime now. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Western Conference to me feels very weird this year because you have like 5 teams that could genuinely win the Stanley Cup, and then everybody else. Like, we talk about Edmonton, Vegas, Dallas, Colorado, and even if you want to throw them in there, Winnipeg, sure. I mean, and Vancouver, 6. We're talking about 6 teams in the West that are all bona fide Stanley Cup contenders, and then you've got that really thick middle class of teams like Seattle, Nashville, Calgary, the Kings, a lot of teams that are just, it's hard to know what to make of them. I know there's a real issue in the West where there just aren't a lot of good goalies, frankly. Like, you look at the situation in LA. Joey Decort's having an okay season in Seattle, but he doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. Even the good teams, Colorado, Georgiev doesn't really convince me that he can go toe-to-toe. Jake Oettinger has shown the ability to in the past, but he's having just an okay season this year. We all know the Edmonton goaltending situation, so I don't know what to make of the West.
The West has 5 to 6 Stanley Cup winning teams. I think we can just put that right out there. And I was about to say, if you didn't include Vancouver there, I was going to come yell at you right there, just because they've been outstanding all year. But when you look at this wildcard race in general, it feels like the 2 teams that get in are just going to be fodder for the top teams that win each division. For example, you look at the standings right now, Nick. LA is in the first spot. St. Louis is in the second if the playoffs were to start today. The Blues will be taking on the Canucks, and I think the Canucks would probably steamroll them. I don't trust the Blues at all. It's been nice that the Blues are having a better season than I expected them to, but I don't expect them to go into Vancouver and win that series in a best of 7. LA, they haven't really had the new head coach bump yet after McClellan got fired. We'll have to see if they get it, but I don't expect them to go up there against Dallas and win that series. They start off the season really nicely, LA that is, and then they've really fallen back down. After that, the Dubois trade has really not worked out for them at this point. So you look at this wildcard race in general in the West, I feel like whoever gets in with these 2 teams is just going to get crushed by the top 2 teams in the conference. And then the West playoffs will really, and I mean really, get started in round 2. And I mean, yeah, we'll have some good round 1 series. For example, Vegas, Edmonton, it looks like we're going to get that in round 1. That's going to be awesome after what we saw last year. Whoever gets second in the Central is going to play Winnipeg, it looks like. Well, I mean, that's what it seems like right now. But Dallas, Winnipeg, Colorado, Winnipeg, whoever it is, that's going to be fun. But when the second round of those playoffs come around, that's when I feel like it's going to get really fun in the West, because I don't think those wildcard teams, whoever gets in, really has a chance. And we can go down the list outside of that. Nashville, there's talk that they may trade UC Saros for one heck of a return, which honestly, I mean, I know Saros is one of the 5 best goalies in the league, but I don't really blame them because the Predators just don't have that much high-end talent on this team. Yeah, Philip Forsberg's having a great year. Roman Josi is incredible, but they still need more high-end talent on that team. It feels like they've just been middling these last few years. Calgary is still in the race, but they've also started to sell a little bit. I don't believe in Minnesota, even though they've won 4 in a row. I don't believe in Seattle, who has 54 points. Arizona, they've lost 8 of their last 10 games. Again, whoever I feel like just gets in, I mean, this is just going to be, and I may get old, exposed for this, who knows. It feels like it's going to be 2 easy series for the top 2 teams that win the division.
That's what it's been in the West. I mean, you think about it. I mean, the time Nashville got in and poor Connor Ingram had to make like 80 saves in that game against Colorado that went to overtime, and they lost anyway, even though he played his tail off that entire game. That's generally what it's been when you are one of those wild cards in the West, and the West has been where, there's an immense concentration of talent on the high-end teams in the West, whereas in the East, even the Rangers, the Bruins, even the Panthers, who, Barkov and Tkachuk are two of the 2025 best players in the league. I think I would definitely take Vancouver's high-end guys because there were more of them. Dallas's high-end guys, there were more of them. Whereas in the East, all of these good teams, other than the Leafs, and I don't even think the Leafs are that good, they only have 2 or 3 of those really high-end guys, where you go out West, once Eichel gets going again, he comes back. If Mark Stone stays healthy, Vegas's high-end guys are awesome. Vancouver's, Colorado's. It's just a different weight class out there in the West. You really, as an Eastern Conference team, you're going to have to hope those teams all beat each other up on the course of a long playoffs to hope that by the time you get to the final against them, that they're dinged up, they're tired, and they don't have it in them. Because like you were saying, man, these teams on the bubble, I mean, Calgary has waved the white flag in trading Lindholm, and they may or may not trade more players, but they have played better since trading those people, which they went 4 in a row. They lost to the Rangers 2-0 on an empty netter on Monday, but they're playing reasonably well since that. So them, Nashville, Seattle, none of those teams, we all say that, and then again, weird things happen. The hockey playoffs are very short and very prone to fluky things happening.
At the end of the day, a lot of 7-game series are honestly pretty random. And even just going back to the East for a second, I wasn't trying to, rag on Brock Nelson for, his season. He has 22 goals. It just, I feel like he hasn't been at the level that I've seen him been at over the last couple of seasons, where I think he's been one of the best goal scorers in the league. And then we discussed the Devils a little bit just because we can combine all this together, Nick. I feel like they may look towards the offseason a little bit, even though they have quite a few young players on this team. They still need to get a goalie. That's my biggest thing, Nick. I mean, they've had talks surrounding Jacob Markstrom. I mean, we'll have to see where that goes. But I don't think the Devils are going anywhere this year if they don't go out there and get an actual starting netminder. I think Vitek Vanacek is a fine goalie, but is he going to win you 4 7-game series in the playoffs? No, he's not. And you said it for Schmidt. He was a nice story against the Rangers, but he's also not going to do that either. He's shown no ability to do it this year. And then one last thing, actually, before we wrap up here, we didn't get to this team that's been kind of on the bubble as well. What do you think of the Maple Leafs this season?
They have 2 defensemen. They have 2 defensemen that are healthy. Their goaltending is a mess.
Yeah.
They are entirely dependent on their high-end guys carrying a brunt of the load, which in a regular season, when you reduce each individual game to its own entity, you're the Leafs. You're basically saying, we think our high-end guys can at least, if not play to a tie with your best guys, play better than them. And that's enough. In the regular season, over the course of a long sample, when you've got 82 games to play with, your high-end guys outplaying other teams. There are a lot of teams who are really good regular season teams. The Rangers, a really good regular season team. The Devils last year, really good regular season team. The Hurricanes have been really good regular season team. The Bruins, where they have enough high-end talent where most nights they're just going to be able to get by on talent. They can beat you enough in the regular season that they can get to that, that 45 to 50 win threshold you need to make the postseason. But then in the playoffs, when it becomes, one play, can you do that one play? And one play is where randomness comes in and where you run into issues if you are a good team. Last thought before we get out of here, I cede to you.
We going up against the Florida Panthers. I don't know about you. I would take the Panthers to beat the Leafs in a 7-game series as they did this past season. And for the Leafs, I know it hasn't been that good of a regular season. Usually they are a really good regular season team, but I still think they owe it to their core of Matthews, Tavares, Marner, and Nylander. And of course, I'll throw Morgan Riley in there too, to go for it every single year. Futures be damned. That's the mindset I had with the Penguins when they were contending for Stanley Cups. I've seen people in the national media go like, well, it may not be the Leafs year to go all in. Screw that. You have players that are once in a lifetime generational talents. Go all in every year until you can. I know they haven't been as good during the regular season as they have been in years past, but they also did just break their curse last year. And sometimes you never know what can happen in the playoffs. I may not think a team like Detroit or maybe even Toronto could go far, but hey, you get a little bit of luck, random stuff happens in a 7-game series, maybe you can pull off an upset or two. But with the Leafs, I still think they should go all in this year. You owe it to that core to do it every year, just like the Penguins did, just like the Blackhawks did, and a couple other teams before. And, the Penguins, they were able to get championships out of it. The Leafs, they're still searching for one with this core.
That'll do it for this week's episode of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Drop us a like if you're watching on YouTube. We'll talk to you guys next week. Later.